I have been looking into theology and Christian history around non-monogamy for some time now, with the aim of creating resources both for polyamorous Christians and for faith communities that want to cultivate belonging for non-monogamous persons. But admittedly, I'm very slow. It takes me a long time to do all my research and put things together. But I'm planning to come out with some informal posts and videos in the coming weeks on this topic because over here in my denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, polyamory has become a hot button issue. At our 227th General Assembly next week, one of the issues that will be discussed is Overture 044, which aims to restrict ordination to people who are either single or monogamous. And people who are a lot smarter about things like polity have already talked at length about this overture. So I'm going to include links for where you can go and learn more about it. For instance, More Light Presbyterians had a Zoom conversation on the General Assembly in general back on June 8th that has a lot of helpful information, including the fact that Overture 044 almost definitely will not pass. For one thing, it's very sloppily written. But what matters most to me, regardless of whether this overture passes, is how this conversation is being held and the impact that has on the spiritual, emotional well-being of actually non-monogamous people, especially those who are ordained or seek to be ordained, but also for all the polyamorous folks who have to listen to their colleagues and fellow members share their often quite uninformed opinions. As a queer and trans person, I come from communities that know all too well what it is to be shoved into this spotlight where our very way of being is treated as a debate, where we are immediately put on the defensive. I am tired of issues of justice and equity almost always being postponed until we are forced into having the conversation, right? Ideally, our denomination would have started talking about polyamory with a spirit of respectful curiosity and out of our commitment to being always reformed by God and to follow where the Holy Spirit guides us to seek to draw our circles ever wider. For Christ's kingdom is one where the people we would least expect to be present at the table are actually given the seats of honor. That's where this conversation should have started. And that's where some of this conversation can be had, because another overture that will be discussed next week is Gen 109, which, if passed, will fund studies into gender, sexuality, and relationships of all kinds, and create solid theological framework around these things. That's the kind of conversation I want to have and I want to be part of, is one that doesn't follow mainstream presumptions and expectations about what family looks like or about what relationship structures are more or less ethical or natural, but instead focuses on having conversations with real human beings and also takes a broader look at everything from blended families and intergenerational households, as well as non-monogamous relationships and the like. That's exciting to me. And that's where I wish this conversation was centered, instead all the news outlets, right, talking about Overture 044, which makes direct connections between non-monogamy and abuse and presumes that non-monogamy is not biblical, that non-monogamy is not natural, that non-monogamy is harmful to marginalized persons, despite the fact that so many polyamorous people are multiply marginalized, and despite the fact that non-monogamous people are a vulnerable group in our society, which is so heavily structured around monogamous marriage. I hate the fact that we're finally talking about polyamory because a right-wing group within our denomination has forced the issue. Because while put forth by the Presbytery of Sierra Nevada, Overture 044 was written by Presbyterians for the Kingdom, which is this group that seeks to take the PCUSA backwards, to a time before ordaining queer people, before celebrating same-sex marriages, before abortion was permitted. This group also affiliates with a broader group called the Reconquistas, which aim to do that very thing within various mainline denominations. And I hope you can hear how indefensibly colonial the name Reconquistas is. This is not the group I want to be leading this conversation or even just kickstarting this conversation. I hate that it puts us immediately on the defensive. I hate that it focuses not on good fruit and the wisdom that polyamorous people can share with the church. That doesn't acknowledge the fact that polyamorous people have been part of our church, of our communities the entire time, even when they're invisibilized. That takes on this quality of non-monogamy being invasive, something being injected into our denomination instead of being a reality for so many of us this entire time. But groups like Presbyterians for the Kingdom tend to know their opponents better than we often know ourselves. This group rightly recognized that polyamory is a weak spot among progressives, that even among many queer-affirming communities, individuals, even among queer people ourselves, a line will often be drawn, non-monogamy, right? So much of the fight for marriage equality, both within and outside of the church, centered around the love is love notion that gay people are just like you. See, they want to get married to one person and have their white picket fence and settle down just like you, which has always thrown the most vulnerable among us under the bus. Historically, there were logical reasons for putting all our eggs in the marriage basket during the AIDS crisis. The legal protections that the institution of marriage offers in terms of visitation rights and inheritance laws and so on, these were rights that we needed ASAP. And even so, it has never been right that our communities have been willing to toss aside those of us who can't or won't fit into cis heteronormative values and systems. But yeah, groups like Presbyterians for the Kingdom know that most churches, most liberal ministers, and so on will avoid hard topics that they know will probably bring tension, even at the expense of full equity and justice, that we will avoid these things until we are forced to confront them. So the people who wrote Overture 044 are hoping that rather than risk the courageous conversations, rather than putting in the effort to learn more, which requires a complete transforming of our minds, right? Like Romans 8 talks about, that we are not to be conformed to the world that tells us that love must be confined into certain borders, to not be conformed to these worldly norms, but to be transformed by the constant renovation of our minds. That's a lot of hard work. And most people would rather maintain a peace that is not peace than risk having division within their communities. And if enough of us decide we don't want to have those conversations, if enough commissioners cave in and agree with this monogamy overture out of fear of being seen as too sexually libertarian or the like, well, the message that that sends to non-monogamous people and others who don't conform to normative expectations, it'll be a pretty bleak message. So like I said, I wish that we were holding the conversation differently, that it wasn't begun on the turf and on the terms of those who would see us all returned to a more unjust time. But this is how it's happening. And so it's time for us to talk about it. And it's time for us to learn together. And in the meantime, as everyone's talking and sharing all their opinions and theologizing, non-monogamous people are going to continue to do what they've been doing. They're going to continue to simply exist in your pews, behind your pulpits, and in your seminaries. And they're going to hear what you say, and they're going to hear what you avoid saying. And they're not going anywhere. not as a whole community at least. I hate knowing that this conversation will probably drive a lot of vulnerable people away from faith communities that betray them. But overall, in the big picture, you cannot regulate difference away. You cannot restrict love and life completely. So, polyamorous folks out there, especially within the Presbyterian Church, keep doing what you're doing. And remember, you don't have to do a damn thing to prove that you belong to Christ's body. You don't have to earn your place in the kingdom, where all relationships that are built on mutuality and love have a place. So yeah, I feel like this video got a little bit rambling and didn't actually include a ton of like material information. But yeah, in the coming days, I'm going to be sharing both non-monogamy 101 and theology and history of how non-monogamy has been viewed in Christianity at different points and places in time. And hopefully at some point also share more stories of lived experiences from polyamorous people. But I wanted to start with a video that makes the foundations of conversation clear. That when we frame it as a debate and we frame it in terms of regulations that need to be instated upon human beings and their relationships, we are not holding a just conversation. That even when circumstances compel some of us to have to do the work of apologetics to have a defense of non-monogamy, that even then we should always recenter around the knowledge that God created us good and that we worship a spirit who is constantly exploding out of all of the boxes and boundaries that human beings construct in order to control and regulate one another. That even when we do employ apologetics towards that cause, to remember that we are not apologizing for being who we are and for existing and belonging to these communities and to the church. So yeah, as the debates go on and the hard conversations are had, center around compassion. As things get difficult, always recenter around a shared aim of increasing justice and protections for the vulnerable, and above all, mutuality and love for one another, and learning ever more about what it means to be in the image of the